All right, let's begin. So we're up to the third Mishnah, right?
Right.
The third Mishnah. So here's what I want to do for the third Mishnah, because the third Mishnah is probably the most difficult Mishnah in the entire Masechta to read. It is the most difficult Mishnah in the entire Masechta to read. In fact, the Marzchias points out that the first three Mishnahs, he says, are actually the most difficult Mishnahs to read in the entire Masechta, and he actually gives a fascinating reason for it. He points out it's a historical issue. He writes as follows. He says that that there are some Mishnahs in Shas. There's a Mishnah, he says, in Masechta Midos, and a Mishnah in Masechta Kelim. There's a few Mishnahs in Shas that Rebbe HaKadosh adopted, that they were already composed by a different Tana, like the ones in Masechta Midos were composed by Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, right? So Rebbe, I guess, wasn't the first Tana to attempt to try and write down some of the traditions. There were other Tanaim that tried doing the same thing, and Rebbe HaKadosh just did it in its total hakefa. He went through everything and organized it appropriately. But there are some Mishnahs that were already like that. A few, very few. So what Rebbe did is instead of reinventing the wheel, for those Mishnayos, he just adopted them. He just wrote them for exactly what they were, even if they were not in the way that Rebbe would have necessarily written it. But they accomplished the goal that Rebbe was trying to accomplish. Again, what was Rebbe's goal? His goal was not to record all of Torah Sheba'al Peh. His goal was the oral traditions. His goal was to compose notes on the oral tradition in order to keep the conversations of Torah Sheba'al Peh alive, keep the Amelus alive. So these three Mishnahs in the beginning of Bava Kama are exactly that. We already came across it, right? The last Mishnah. There was one line we picked up on that I think Jack pointed out, that we said in the last Mishnah that when the Mishnah said nechasim hamiyuchadim, which the Mishnah meant, we said nechasim hamiyuchadim meant that it is that it's not hefker. Well, what's not hefker? Is the thing that was damaged hefker, or is the animal that damaged hefker? What was the Mishnah trying to teach me, right? So we said that up until now, the Mishnah's focus was on the property that was damaged versus the mazik, versus the one causing the damage. So, but when it comes to this line, the Mishnah, the subject switches, right? And the focus becomes the damager, not the victim. So that's a good example, right, of that. Well, why would Rebbe HaKadosh have written it that way? So it could be that Rebbe was just adopting this Mishnah. It could be he didn't actually write this Mishnah. So that's what the Marzchias writes. And he says that there's no better example than the Mishnah we're about to read. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But the Mishnah we're about to read it's fairly impossible. And you could argue it's impossible to read without the Gemara. Pretty much impossible. And the Marzchias Lashon, he says the following. These first three Mishnahs in our Mishnah, Hainu, Arba Avos, the first Mishnah of Arba Avos Nazikin. Number two is V'chol Shechafti, that anything that I'm chayiv and it's mammon, right? The second Mishnah, and then the Mishnah the Shum Kesev, in our Mishnah about Shum Kesev, which we'll define in a second. Mishunim Mishar HaMishnayos. They're completely different than the other Mishnayos. Ayde Lashon Ktsara, they are too succinct in their language. Ve'hem b'shinoi halasha, and they use different type of verbiage. Kasher ma'ayin yakir, that when all you have to do is just look at it and you understand v'avin, and you'll understand. Gemara huchru lefarish relidrosh kol mila. Therefore, the Gemara has to do something it doesn't always do, which is literally translate every word in the Mishnah. Usually, the Gemara is just, springboarding off of the Mishnah to have a discussion about the halacha. The Gemara doesn't always have to actually define what the Mishnah means. Umedaktik hashas, and it has to actually get the definition of the Mishnayos. And he says that it's that this Tana was really a Tana from Yerushalayim. The high Tana Yerushalmihu, Hainu Shemishnayos Elu, Ba'u Mechacham Yerushalmi. It came from a certain scholar from Yerushalayim, Asher Haya Tofes Lashon Ketzara, that used a very succinct language. V'echnisam Rabbeinu HaKadosh b'seder Elu, and therefore Rebbe just adopted it and put it into the same seder. V'anicham kamo shematzam v'lo zazim imkomam. Rebbe was a stickler for Masorah, didn't want to deviate from the exact language of the Tana he was quoting, and then for adopting from, and therefore he kept it exactly the same way, even though it's not 100% clear. So therefore, based off of this Marzchias, what I did is I made a small packet here. I know it's thick, but it's actually quite small. And what I did is that for this Mishnah, because we want to understand it, we're actually just going to do the Gemara on this Mishnah. We're going to read the Mishnah, but then we're going to go through the Gemara. In fact, Rashi, the very first Rashi, the only Rashi on this Mishnah, says Kula Masnisim Mefarish Gemara. This entire Mishnah is going to be explained by the Gemara. So I felt that it made a lot more sense for us to just read through not the entire Gemara, but for read through the parts of the Gemara that explain the Mishnah. And that way we'll get a better appreciation for the halachos contained in here. So I copied the all Hebrew or the art scroll starting from page 4 of the packet. You can follow in either. It'll be perfectly fine. Okay, let's begin. So the Mishnah says the following. Again, we're going to read it. We are not going to translate it because we don't, frankly, understand what it even means. Shum Kesev. We're in, if you're following the All Hebrew, line number 2, and if you're following in the English, it would be on page 4 in the first section at the top, line number 4. Shum Kesev, which means an evaluation of money. Shava Kesev, which means an equivalent of money. Bifnei Bezdin, in front of Bezdin. Ve'al pi edim, and in front of witnesses. B'nei chorin, people who are free, meaning they are not slaves. B'nei bris, people that are Jewish. V'hanashim b'chal hanezek, women are included in damages. V'hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin, and both the damaged and the damager pay money. Everybody clear? We know exactly what this Mishnah means, right? Okay, good. Right, the whole thing doesn't have a flow. It's just there's so many aspects of it that scream at you that we need to actually learn the Gemara on this. And Rashi already said, Rashi doesn't even try helping us out. He just says, just be patient. Kul mafarish b'Gemara. Just read the Gemara, everything will come clear. All right, so let's see the Gemara. So on page 4, column 1, line number 2. In the English and in the Hebrew, we're just on line number 4. So says the Gemara, my shum kesef. What does the Mishnah mean when it says shum kesef, an evaluation of money? Rabbi Yehuda says shum zeh lo yeh ella bekesef, that when Bezdin is evaluating the financial loss, they are supposed to evaluate it in dollar amounts. They're supposed to evaluate it in dollar amounts. Now, what is that coming to tell me? So says the Gemara, Tanina, this is a teaching that's reflective of the following brayso. Lahad the Tanu Rabban. in that which our rabbis taught us. What's the case? Para shehizika, line number 7, that a cow that caused damage, a shehizika talis that caused damage to a talis, vitalis shehizika para, or a talis, and two different readings in the Rishonim, not for now, and the talis caused damage to the cow. Okay, so the way that Rashi learns this, and the way that Muki Yosef learns this, and the way that Rabbeinu Hananel learns this, the way that most Rishonim learn this, not like Tosos, is that what the scenario here is that the animal is walking in the street, and the animal trips on a talus. And at the same time that it trips over the talus becomes damaged, and the animal got hurt at the same time. So my animal is walking down the street, it trips on the talus, so it damages the talus, and it also gets hurt in the process. Okay, so this is that's the case. So Ein Omrim, don't say the following, says the Gemara. Don't say the middle of line number 7 in the Gemara. In the English, it is in column 1, line number 12. Ein Omrim, don't say Teitze para bitalis, vitalis bipara. Don't say we're just going to make an even exchange and say that it's even Steven, and your cow got hurt, but my talus got hurt, so we'll just call it even. Ella, rather shamin oso bidamim. Rather, we need to evaluate the case. We need to evaluate the case on a scale of exact value, right? And right, you don't just say that it's even Steven. So that's what the Mishnah was trying to teach. Shum kesef means we have to evaluate the case. We don't just assume that if both parties got damaged, that we'll call it even. Don't assume that. We have to evaluate every case. Okay. So the Nemuki Yosef asked the question and says, "What would you have thought otherwise?" Right? Well, and it's a serious. Well, what would you have thought otherwise? Why would you assume it would be just even Steven, right? So what is the Chiddush of the Mishnah? So the Nemuki Yosef answers, and he says it must be that the scenario the Gemara was talking about is one where it's mamish, like to the naked eye, it seems like it's equal damage, right? We know that the animal costs $300, and we know that the talus costs $300, and we know that both are completely unusable anymore. Okay, whatever the exact details would be, but it's obvious to the average bystander, right, that this was both parties were damaged, quote unquote, equally. Comes along our Mishnah to tell me we're not going to rely on what we just assume. We have to do a proper evaluation. If this is brought in front of Beis Din, they don't just assume in a scenario that would seem to be even Steven. They have to make a proper evaluation every single time. That's what Nebuchadnezzar Yosef says. Rabbeinu Hananel doesn't say it like that. Rabbeinu Hananel actually says that Shema mina dechol below shuma lo gamar umachni. He says that no, even if they're not even, nevertheless, that we shouldn't just say by the fact that both parties got damaged, people might assume that in such a scenario they're just going to call it even like that. It doesn't even need to be that it's like as if they were so equal. No, not even to that extent. People might just assume that if they both got damaged, so then they cancel each other out. Then no, we have to make sure we evaluate every scenario, even if both parties got damaged, right? There's no nizak or mazik. They're both a nizak and a mazik. They're both the damaged and the damager. So then don't assume that we're going to call it even. From that perspective, we have to evaluate the scenario. Okay. That is the first case of the Mishnah. Now let's move on to the second case of the Mishnah. Line number 9 in the Gemara. And following the English, it is on line 20 across from the next arrow in bracket. The Gemara says the following. Quoting from the Mishnah, Shava Kesef. What does Shava Kesef mean? it is equal in money. What does that mean? It's equal in money, says the Gemara. Titana Rabbanan. Our rabbis taught the following: Shava Kasev. What does its equivalent in money mean? Malamed. This comes to teach me she'ein bezdin niskakim elen and nechasim sheyesh ben achrayos. This comes to tell me that bezdin, when they are collecting from the damager, they are going to collect from the damager karka. They're going to collect real estate. They're going to collect that which is equivalent to money. They're going to collect real estate, meaning that they have the right to collect. When the Gemara speaks this out, remember that we had a whole discussion about that. What do they go to first? They first go to the metaltalin, they first go to the movable objects, and then they go to the karka. Okay, so that's what the Mishnah is trying to tell me over here, that the bezdin has the ability to go right after the karka, right after the real estate. Aval im kadam nizak v'tafas metaltalin bezdin goven mehen. However, if the nizak, the one who is damaged, gets up and goes and collects the metaltalin, goes and collects the movable objects, then bezdin goven lo mehen. Bezdin can remove. He can go over to him and say, you jumped the gun and you need to return that which you took from the fellow. And we're going to evaluate the situation and we're going to decide how the money is supposed to be paid up. It's supposed to be paid up with metaltalin, or it's supposed to be paid up with real estate. Okay. We've now defined shum kesef and shava kesef. Again, the Mishnah said shum kesef. What does that mean? It means that we have to evaluate every scenario, even if it seems like it's obvious how the money should be paid back. And number two, shava kesef, that we go after the equivalent of money, meaning bezdin has the decision-making power to decide how the money here is supposed to be, how the value is supposed to be paid up, with metaltalin, with movable objects, or with the real estate. Let's continue. Skip now to, in the Gemara, it's line 29. We're going to skip to the next part of the Mishnah, which would be on page 6, I think. Yeah, page 6. On page 6. The Gemara, quoting from the Mishnah, in line column 1, line 15, in the art scroll, and following the Hebrew, it's on line 29. The Gemara quotes from the Mishnah, "B'pnei bezdin," in front of bezdin. What does this come to teach me? Prat. This is coming to exclude lemocher nechasav. So what is this coming to tell me? This is coming to tell me that if someone let's say owed money, okay, if someone owed money, they have to pay up what they owed, but only if at the time that they're standing in front of bezdin, they have the money available to pay it back. If they don't have the money to pay it back, so then bezdin can't do anything about it. What would be that scenario? This is the first assumption of the Gemara. What would be that scenario? That scenario would be that, let's say somebody owed, had owed something, whatever it was, they damaged someone's property or whatever the situation is, and then they come to bezdin, and bezdin says, okay, you owe this fellow X number of dollars, and he says, sorry, yesterday I made a big deal and I sold all of or whatever it is, all my stuff, I gave away all my stuff or whatever it is. He basically got himself out of the of having to pay it back. Okay, I used up all the money or whatever it is. Okay, he owes cash and I don't have any cash. I tied up everything in different investments or whatever it might be. Okay, so says the Gemara that's what the Mishnah means when it says Mifnei Bezdin, I need to pay up in front of Bezdin. It's if I have the money, only if I have the money when I stand in front of Bezdin. So that's the Gemara. It says that's ridiculous. Shma mina lova umocher nechosa va'achar kach bo'la Bezdin a Bezdin govin lo mehen. that says the Gemara that, well, that would mean that if, let's say, somebody borrowed money, and then after they borrow money, they go ahead and they go ahead and they use up all the cash, right? They don't have anything to pay up their loan with. So then what? So now they're going to be off the hook completely? That's ridiculous. So says the Gemara, that must not be what the Mishnah is assuming. What the Mishnah is assuming is Ella prat lebezdin hediotos. That when we say in front of Bezdin, what it means is that you have to go in front of a proper Bezdin. Now, this is a whole discussion of itself. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, the beginning of Masechta Sanhedrin, is a very long discussion about this halacha of not going in front of a Bezdin shel hediotos. The Rashi Alator already tells us in the beginning of Parshat Mishpatim, Ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, says Rashi, lifneihem velo lifnei hediotos velo lifnei akum, that you have to go to a proper bezdin, not a bezdin of hediotos, and hediotos means people that don't that are not completely qualified to be dayanim, meaning that they do not have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu on down. That the way smicha worked is described in the Torah, as we learned from the Parshas Pinchas, when Moshe Rabbeinu gave smicha to Yoshua, right? That he gave him the ability to do hora, to make a decision on cases, and he has the power of creating Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's a bal hora, that's a samach. That those that have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu on down, it's a whole discussion of itself exactly what that power is, but they have more qualifications than just a regular rabbi. And when it comes to dealing with these cases, for many cases of monetary loss, the whole discussion, we can define more exactly what that would be, but for certain cases of monetary loss, you can't go in front of a regular bezdin. You have to go in front of a bezdin shel mumchim, a bezdin of smuchim, a bezdin of proper dayan. Okay, you can't just go in front of any bezdin. You have to go in front of a properly qualified bezdin that have real smicha. My smicha is not real smicha. My smicha that I have, my rabbinic ordination, is a degree. It's like a degree that people would get in the university. It's a degree. Hopefully, it's an important degree, but it's a degree. When it comes to real smicha, though, it's more than a degree. It is a person that's given a certain level of authority in halacha. That person with a certain level of authority in halacha is fit to be able to sit on a bezdin. Okay, and for many cases, you are not allowed to go to any other bezdin. You have to go to a bezdin of smuchim. So then it becomes a shaila. So then how for pretty much all monetary cases, that is the halacha. That's what the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. So if that's the case, so then how are we able to have how do we deal with civil cases today? We don't have any smuchim today, right? So for like a bezdin of chalitza, you might not need smuchim, or for a bezdin to do gerus, you might not need smuchim. For certain types of bezdins, you may not need smuchim, but for the most part, a bezdin, especially in dinei mamnos, a bezdin, they need to be smuchim. They need to have proper smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu. So how do we do civil law today? So right, there's plenty of batei dinim. So how are they doing what they're all going against the halacha? How are they doing what they're doing? So the Gemara in Bava Kama on Pei Dalet Amud Aleph says that this is based off of a principle called the Anan Shlichusayu Dikamoi Avdinan. We are the shliachs. We are the agents of the original dayanim that had smicha. That the original dayanim that had smicha gave reshus, let's say those that were in Eretz Yisrael, gave reshus to the dayanim outside of Eretz Yisrael to sit and be done and judge certain cases. And what would that include? The Gemara says it has to fit under the following qualifications. If it's something that is shchiach, it's a common occurrence. It's a common occurrence. For example, cases of someone's property being damaged or something like that, right? Things that happen all the time. If it is chesron kis, that it's a monetary loss versus a penalty, which I'll give you an example. An example would be someone stole from someone else. Okay, so someone steals from someone else. So then it says in the Torah that if the ganav is caught red-handed, so he doesn't just pay back the principal, he also has to pay back a penalty. He has to pay back a fine. He has to pay double what he stole. Okay, the value of the basketball is $100. He has to pay back now the basketball plus another $100. Okay, that's the payment of kefel. Today, if you're using shlichus hayu, that we are acting as agents, you would be able to judge such a case, but the penalty payment wouldn't exist. The penalty payment will fall away because a bezdin is only allowed to judge the chesron kis, the monetary loss, not any penalty that would ensue from there as well. Okay, so it needs to be a case that is it needs to be common, and it needs to be a case of chesron kis, of monetary loss. If it's not either of those, bezdin today would not be able to sit and judge that case. For example, the example the Gemara says is today a bezdin will not be able to sit and judge on a scenario of one Jew, God forbid, beating up another Jew, right? If someone came to bezdin with a claim of that a fellow Jew beat me up, okay, which does have monetary payment that would have to be made, right? You have to pay, the Mishnah says, the first Mishnah in the 8th chapter of Bava, you have to pay nezek, the damage, tsar, the pain the person went through. You have to pay regarding the tsar, the sheves, the fact that you have to pay his unemployment, ripoy, his medical bills, and boshes, and any embarrassment that came from having been beat up. So part of that, some of it is a penalty, but most of that are paying up the monetary loss that incurred, right? His unemployment and his medical bills and the actual financial loss that came from, his value has gone down, being that he may have a handicap now or whatever it might be. So then the Gemara says we should be able to judge those cases outside of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara, no, because it's not common. It's not common for one Jew to beat up another Jew, right? Because that's not the way of Jews. It's very, very uncommon for one Jew to beat up another Jew. Now, cases of assault come up all the time, but not in bezdin. Bezdin very rarely see one Jew beating up another Jew, which is true. It rings true to, right? In Eretz Yisrael, unfortunately, everybody's stealing from each other. That's an unfortunate thing. So my grandfather always complained about it. He says that he knew that in his lifetime Mashiach was never going to come because in Eretz Yisrael everybody is stealing from each other and there's so much bribery in the government and so he would always say that he knows Mashiach's not going to come because there's too much shochad, he said. So but one Jew beating up another Jew, very uncommon. Very, very uncommon. Unfortunately, it's been some scenarios in the news recently about the police getting into people were not respecting the police authority and we're taking physical action against them and vice versa. So those are very uncommon, and they should never happen. So so basically, getting back to what we were saying, that yes, the Gemara rings true. Al pi halacha, it needs to be a bezdin mumkin. It needs to be a proper bezdin that all these cases are judged in front of. But if that option is not available, then we can rely on the concept of shlichus hayu. Rely on the concept of shlichus hayu. Okay, that the bezdin of today is agents for certain things. They have the right to step in and be done the cases. Okay. Next part of the Mishnah we'll focus on, and then that's what we'll stop for today. The Mishnah then says, what time is it? How much time we have?
1:45.
It's 1:45 right now. Yeah, we'll start and we'll see whether or not we finish it. Al pi Adam. It's on column 2 on page 6. Al pi Adam. The next part of the Mishnah is that on the basis of witnesses. What does that mean? What does that mean that it's on the basis of witnesses? That it needs to be paid up on the basis of witnesses. So, so here the Gemara says, Prat, this is coming to teach me that Lamoda Beknas, that this is coming to exclude someone that was Moda Beknas, they admitted to a fine they have to pay. The Acherkach Ba'u Aiden. And then witnesses came. Let's say for example, let's just talk about what this concept of moda b'knas pater is. That if someone admits to a fine, they're off the hook from that penalty. That let's say I was caught red-handed with the with the basketball. I stole the basketball and I was caught red-handed. So we said before that there's now a punishment where not only you have to pay back what you stole, but you also need to pay back the value on top of that. So you're paying back essentially double. Okay, so that's the concept of kefal. Now, kefal is a penalty. Let's say I get caught, and then I run to Bezdin, and I admit in front of Bezdin what I did. So says the Gemara. There's a Gemara right over here. The Gemara, a few places in Shas. This is moda b'knas. I admitted to what I did, and therefore I'm going to be off the hook from having to pay the penalty. Moda b'knas pater. I'm not going to have to pay the penalty. It's only if I'm still denying it. And then Bezdin, and I'm in front of Bezdin, I didn't do it. Yeah, except we have witnesses that come in now and give testimony of the fact that we saw you with the basketball. Okay, then I have to pay the penalty. But until that point, if I admit it, so then I don't have to pay the penalty. That's what our Mishnah means. Al pi'edim means that it needs to be, if I'm going to have to pay a penalty, it needs to be al pi'edim. It needs to be according to the testimony of witnesses. Okay, it needs to be according. Now, why would it be that moda b'knas is pater? That if I run to Bezdin and I admit what I did, I'm going to be off the hook. So there's a number of different explanations given in the Rishonim. Probably the most common explanation that's found in all the Rishonim is we assume the guy's trying to do tshuva, right? What's the penalty? The penalty is not really to the benefit of the person that was stolen from. The person who was stolen from, Shmuel first is calling me. So okay, yeah. So I'm sorry. We're just we'll end here. Just give me 1 second.